in our Bible readings, we have really the 16th chapter of Genesis through 24. We mentioned the book of Genesis deals with book of beginnings. That's what Genesis means. We ended 15. Glad to see Farron and Sandra with us, and Lee. We ended 15 the other night with the fact that God had told Abraham to go out and how am I going to know that I'm going to have a great posterity? He said, go out and number the stars if you're able. So shall thy seed be. And God counted it to him for righteousness. In the 16th chapter, Abraham and Sarah try to help extricate God from a difficulty by doing what? That's right, giving Hagar, and to Hagar and Abraham was born Ishmael, father of the Arabs. 17 is the covenant of circumcision. Sarah's name, Abraham's name, Abram, which means exalted father, to Abraham, meaning father of multitude. How old is Abraham when the covenant of circumcision is given? It's mentioned specifically. 99. And then that's chapter 17. 18 and 19 could go together, but 18 where three men who are also what?
Angels unaware.
Angels unaware. There you go. Good. And in that chapter, God tells Abraham through one of the angels that he's going to do what? Destroy Sodom. And Abraham pleads, starting with, if I find, how many? 50, 45, 40, 30, 20, and then 10. And so what happens is, by inference, he couldn't find what? 10 righteous souls. What ends up in 19, who actually escape? Who are the ones? Lot, his two daughters, and his wife. Initially his wife, okay, Mrs. Lot. Her name's not given. And of course on the way out, what happens? She looks back, evidently longs for her lifestyle back there. Only reason we know that is in what Jesus says about in Luke 17 concerning the destruction of Jerusalem. When you go out, don't come back, don't get anything, don't just leave it all. And then he makes this little statement, remember Lot's wife. And so that's the illustration for what Jesus said, so you can deduce almost backwards why she did that. That's 19. Then 20, what do we have? Abraham among the Philistines. Good. And then 21, important passage. Isaac is born. And then Isaac is 22, offered. And then 23, the death of Sarah. We have several things actually. The death of Sarah, the purchase of what? The field in which was the cave of Machpelah. And wonderful, wonderful people are buried there. Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and Jacob and Leah. Yeah. Okay, so that's 23. 24 is where we got down to. 24 is, and it's really significant, really even a teaching point, that here in 24, the narrative is going to end with Abraham in chapter 25. The mention of the 6 sons by Keturah, and also the births of Jacob and Esau. However, you also have, back in 24, in order to further the narrative, something has to happen to Isaac. He has to have a maid, and what was that sweet? A wife for Isaac. So that's what our chapter content is in 24, is a wife for, who's the man that goes to up to Padan Aram to find him one? Evidently Eliezer. He's his special servant. He's mentioned earlier, not mentioned in that chapter. All right, enough on that. Let's move on in our study. We have come to chapter 7. And where did I put that? I just had it. Thank you. It was hidden. Okay, so we've come to chapter 7 in Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount. I'm not going to review. I'm going to do a few things differently. I'm not going to review every time. Maybe take some different time. But we're going to try to cover a little more ground this morning, rather than all 4 accounts and everything up to this. But just remember, the gospel of the kingdom has been emphasized by the Lord. And so we have the kingdom of heaven emphasized in the Sermon on the Mount. In chapter 5, attitudes as well as actions. And then in chapter 6, what behind those attitudes and actions? Motives. And then in 19 through the end, we have the lay up for yourselves what? Treasures in heaven. So in chapter 7, we have really the first 12 verses seem to constitute a major division, and then that's divided into 3 with the don't judge harshly, judge not that you be not judged. That's 1 through 5. Then 6 seems to be by itself. Give not that which is holy unto the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine. And then 7 through 11 or 7 through 12 perhaps, ask, seek, and knock. God's gracious benevolence to those who genuinely seek after Him. And then 12 is kind of a summary. Therefore, always remember it's a conclusion of something. Therefore, whatsoever you would that men should do unto you, what do we know that as? The golden rule. And so he ends with that. And then 13 through the end of the chapter seems to be, this invitation, this great invitation to come and be a part of this kingdom. Enter ye in at the what? Straight gate. And then in 15 through 20, but beware of false teachers. They don't show you or tell you who they are. I'm a false teacher, beware of me. No, they come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. And so you have to be some fruit detectors, judges, by their fruits ye shall know them. And the test in 21, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will. And then it's ended there in our gospel meeting we had. The person who hears and heeds is likened to the wise man. The person who hears and fails to heed is the foolish man. So where we are is right here that we talked about. The reaction of the sermon is they were astounded at Jesus because he was one who spoke with authority, not as the scribes. All right, so here in the first 5 verses, we have this warning against judging harshly. Now, I wanted to, Brother Earnhardt in his booklet has a really good connector, and this is kind of, it's not really verbatim, but I lifted some ideas that he has, and his is some of the best I've ever read. And I've read a lot of things on the Sermon on the Mount. And a lot of times, the first 5 verses of chapter 7 are seemingly a very difficult section of the sermon for a lot of scholars. They say, well, how does it fit to what we just studied? But best I can tell, the connection between these verses and what precedes may be a type of a caveat or a balance to Jesus' earlier teaching. Our own understanding, Jesus has been extremely vigorous and rigorous about, this and not this, and this and not that. And it seems to be almost a balance. Okay, say you get it, but not everybody, or some others are having some struggles with it. Our own understanding and practice of kingdom righteousness should not bring about in us a harsh, censorious judgment toward those who struggle with it. While we should help others see what God's right ways are all about, it should not be with an uncaring, self-righteous attitude that is more concerned with the other sins than our own. You ever met anybody like that? They were just, it was all about what somebody else was doing right, and they had their own set. So let's read those verses. Cooper, I don't call on you as much as I should. Why don't you read those first 5 verses for us? You got your own Bible?
I left mine.
Oh, okay. Yeah, 1 through 5 of 7.
Judge not that ye be not judged, for with the judgment you pronounce you will be judged, and with the measure you see it, you use it, will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye.
Okay, all right, thank you. So, judge not that you be not judged. We've got let's go ahead if you don't already have it open, page 54 in your workbooks. And we have more on chapter 7 than we've had in 5 and 6. But I mentioned in the note under chapter 7, various subjects are here discussed, but Jesus' teaching against hypocrisy continues in the background. These verses point out the way of life, how it's narrow, 13 and 14. False prophets will seek to deter us, and the way does not come by prayer, miracles alone, and plainly pointed out how to go. And I hope our memory verses are coming along. All right, judge not that you be not judged condemns a particular kind of judging. Judging can sometimes mean to condemn, while on other occasions it means to discern or decide between things that differ. Are all forms of judging condemned? Yes or no? No, that's right. Explain using John 7:24, Matthew 7:15, and 1 Corinthians 5. Who wants to answer that?
Judge righteous judgment.
Okay, that's right. Judge righteous. Judge not according to appearance, but judge righteous judgment is in the passage there in in John 7. The people were, some of the enemies of Jesus were telling the people, he basically is not what he claims to be, what others think he is. And so he said, you don't judge according to appearance, what seems to be the conventional wisdom about you, but judge righteous. Listen to what I'm saying. Make your own. So there's a discerning. By the way, I didn't say this, and I don't have this on the charts, but there's a Greek word krenos that is used to describe judgment. In fact, it's the word used here, and it's used in several different ways. Kind of like our English word judge has a variety of meanings. You can have a judge, a backfield judge in football. He's trying to make sure everything's going right, and he decides. There's a discernment. Quality control. What is quality control in most corporations? What do they do, David?
Make sure everything's right when it goes out the door.
Exactly. Here's a manufacturing line. When it goes out, somebody has to make a judgment. Is everything just right on this or not? And so there's a judgment. The Federal Drug FDA, Federal Drug Administration, what do they do?
They monitor people that manufacture drugs.
Yeah.
To make sure they're suitable and they're safe.
Exactly. So there's got to be a discerning, a judgment on all that. So, people say, I don't want to be judgmental. Well, they don't really know what they're talking about unless they think that the only way it's used is some kind of a harshness or some kind of a judgment where you're condemning. But then even then, that's right. You know who sometimes are the most judgmental people? The people who tell you that you shouldn't do what? You shouldn't judge. Yeah. Here say, I don't think that behavior is right. Somebody said, you're being judgmental. Well, what did you just do to me? You were judgmental to me. You're doing the same thing you're condemning. So the truth of the matter is that the word is used in a lot of different senses. In fact, in Matthew, the second passage I had here, Matthew 7:15, he said, beware of what? False prophets. Okay, what does that demand? It demands a judgment to be made, a discerning of what false teaching and true teaching is, who false teachers and truth teachers are. It demands both. And so, and then in the 1 Corinthians 5, this passage probably would be more than a lot of people in the world would find objectionable. The problem is in Corinth that there was a man who had what? His father's wife. And they were not doing anything about it. So Paul said, I've already judged this matter. That's in those early verses. And then he says in the latter part of the chapter, let's just turn to it. He says in the latter part that what have I to do with judging those who are in the world? But those who are in the church, you're to put them away. Look at verse, I don't have this in verse 3. Who has that? Lee, you got it? 1 Corinthians 5:3, sweetie.
For I indeed, as absent in body but present in spirit, have already judged, as though I were present, him who has so done this deed.
Yeah, I have judged, I have made a judgment on it. And same word, Prentice. And then let's keep going down in verse 9. I wrote in my epistle, have no company with fornicators, not at all meaning the fornicators of this world, then you'd have to go out of the world. But if any man named a brother, verse 11, be a fornicator or covetous, don't with such a one know not to eat, have nothing to do with it. All right, 12 and 13, Lindsay, if you would, 12 and 13. That's where our word is found again.
For what have I to do with judging outsiders? Is it not those inside the church whom you are to judge? God judges those outside. Purge the evil person from among you.
Yes, so here is the judgment, and in a sense it is a condemnatory judgment. He has done wrong, he needs to be withdrawn from. And so there is that sense of various uses of the word. It can mean select, to pick, to choose. It can mean to judge. In fact, the word judge can be a noun as well as a verb. A noun in the sense of you're doing it, and the verb, the action of the one doing it. Yes, ma'am, Patty.
I can't remember right now, but sorry, it's a help. So he was not there judging. So how did he find out? I can't remember how he found out in 1 Corinthians.
Who you talking about? What now?
How did
Oh, Paul found out about the man,
Yes.
probably from those of the household of Chloe from chapter 1. It's been signified unto me to you, my brethren, of them that are of the household of Chloe, that there are divisions among you. I've looked at 1 Corinthians as the first 6 chapters deal with difficulties that probably you heard about from the house of Chloe. Then 7 through 14, he says, now concerning things whereof you wrote, that there was actually some letters, and possibly Chloe's house could have brought them. Great question. Of course, also the Spirit could have just inspired him. I don't doubt that either. Okay, good question. So if anybody in the world knows a Bible passage, it's this one. Especially those. I remember back in the 1980s. There was a case, some of you who are our age would remember this. There was a case out in Oklahoma where a woman committed adultery. I think it was with the mayor of the city. And the church, she was a member of the church. And the elders of the church withdrew from her. And she made it, y'all remember that? And she made I've got a book on it. She made a case, a court case out of it. And it ended up that, what was the guy's name on CNN way back? Donahue, Phil Donahue, was that his name? Y'all remember that? That Garland Elkins, who's was a preacher up in the Memphis area, worked with the Get Well Church of Christ, and sponsored also the School of Preaching up there. He was on with Phil Donahue, and the woman, and I think maybe one or two other elders there. And they hashed it out, and that was when talk, kind of back and forth was kind of new. And anyway, that was in the 80s. And Phil Donahue probably wouldn't know where Matthew was found, but he knew that verse. Well, what about this, preacher? Judge not that you be not. Aren't y'all doing that? And to his credit, Elkins did a good job showing, well, this is how the word's used, and this is how the Bible. There's a standard. I remember, like yesterday, he would say, with attorneys, an attorney can be disbarred if he, doesn't meet certain. And he used several other illustrations I thought at the time were extremely good. That if you have belonged to this kind of an organization, and the organization Well, think Rush Probst at Hoover. You remember what happened to him?
Football coach.
Yeah, with his football coach. He had another family in Anniston besides the one he had here. And going on, he's fired. Well, there are standards for that meet with every, that they can set, whether it be a judicial with attorneys, it can be the American, what does the doctors belong to, medical doctors, what is it? It's not JAMA, that's the Journal of American, what is it, guys? Don't remember. But anyway, they take the Hippocratic Oath, for whatever that means nowadays. But all of those things that they hold you to a standard of behavior. And if you don't keep that standard, you'd be put out. That's the same way it is with the church. But people don't like to look at it from a religious point of view because we think, well, yeah, I understand if you're an attorney, you might hurt somebody over here, or if you're a doctor, it might be malpractice, or you ought not have those. But when it comes to the religion of Jesus Christ that has eternal consequences, then people think, well, you just need to live and let live, that kind of idea. And that's not the way it is. The Bible is our guide. It's not a set of churches, not a set of preachers, elders. The Bible, and when the Bible is as specific as it says here, that there are certain behaviors that have to be dealt with. And if a person is a rebel, it's not a case where he slipped up and he comes back, but he's rebelling against what the Bible teaches, then he has to be dealt with. And judging or not judging, that's what. Yes, sir.
Football coaches,
Yes.
college presidents,
Yes.
people in business,
Yeah.
all have moral clauses
In their
in
contracts.
their contracts.
Yeah.
And everybody understands the behavior of somebody that's in an organization reflects on that organization.
Yes.
And particularly in the Lord's church.
In the Lord's
when
church.
the organization is about people's
Yeah.
morality
About their morality
and how
their,
they
Yeah.
if an elder's qualified, he has a good reputation in
Yeah.
the community, not as a philanderer or a drunk or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, people understand it, they just
They don't want to.
reject it, particularly if it's a sexual sin.
Yes, that's exactly
They
right.
want to accept those from any rigorous enforcement of codes.
Of morality or sexual
a level
immorality.
of morality.
Yes, yeah. That's exactly right. What was the coach's name down in Alabama? Mike, Price. And Dubose too. Dubose, was his secretary. What was that?
He never even coached a game. He
That's
didn't
right.
make it
Yeah,
to the
he was gone and then complained about not getting a second chance. But that was part, what was that? There's a phrase, if a person and these coaches that make millions, if they want to buy or if they do something, then the school doesn't have to buy them. Is it show cause?
Show cause.
Yeah, show cause.
Just cause.
Yeah, and so if they actually do something that violates what's in their contract, there's no buyout. The school doesn't have to buy them. But we understand, as Gene said, we understand that in every area. But people are so, and the thing that really matters the most, going to heaven and eternity, it's like, well, we shouldn't be judgmental, but judge not that you be not judged. And so then you know that he has to be talking about a specialty judgment, because he says in the second clause, for with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And so there is that sense of harshness, not giving someone the benefit of the doubt. That's the idea behind it. And we really mentioned that in the note down, but I answered number 2, didn't I? What kind of judgment is forbidden? Notice how James 2:13 helps explain. James 2:13 is really it's almost a commentary, I think, on this passage. Judgment without mercy. That's right, judgment without mercy. I had to note to myself, there is a phrase that's used in legal circles where, and really it should apply in everything, the presumption of what? Innocence. That the court should presume one innocent unless proven guilty. The evidence has to be substantial. And it can be circumstantial, it can be eyewitness, it can be several areas of evidence, but it has to overturn the presumption of innocence. And that's really what Jesus says here. Did the law have a kind of a presumption of innocence in it? Did the law, the Mosaic?
Mouth
Yes.
of 2 or 3 witnesses.
That's right. Man, there had to be 2 or 3. You couldn't just, well, I think this guy needs to be executed. But no, it had to be, there was a presumption of innocence given the defendant until it was proved otherwise. And that idea is that can hit really close to home. Somebody says, well, I think, when there's not really solid evidence, and then we'll turn over to 1 Timothy 6. 1 Timothy 6 is a passage that is basically dealing with what Jesus is here condemning. Judge not that you be not judged. Paul deals with people who would teach a different doctrine and the kinds of morality that's associated with it. Verse 3 and 4. Read that if you would, Landon. 3 and 4, please. 1 Timothy 6.
If anyone teaches a different doctrine and does not agree with the sound words of our Lord Jesus Christ and the teaching that accords with godliness, he is puffed up with conceit and understands nothing. He is an unhealthy craving for controversy and for quarrels about words, which produce envy, dissensions, slander, evil suspicions.
That's good. Evil suspicions. Do you have another translation? Some of the older ones. Richard, what does the King James have? Surmisings. The American Standard has surmising. What does the New American Standard have on that? Suspicion. Same thing. So evil to suspect, to have a suspicion means that you don't have what? Proof. You don't have proof. You're guessing. And the idea behind this evil surmising is you are surmising or guessing, attaching to the guess the worst possible motive and attributing to the person. And so that's the idea really about back here. Let's go back to Matthew 7 about this kind of judgment that the Lord condemns. So what kind of judgment is forbidden? James 2, a judgment that is without mercy. We don't give somebody the benefit of the doubt. Or, as Paul said in 1 Timothy 6, evilly surmising or suspicions or guessing about somebody and assigning the worst possible. I'll tell you what happens. Just a second, Brother Gene. When that happens and then somebody starts putting that around to brethren, what it does is it creates a what? It creates a division, creates a faction. I think brother so-and-so had it out for me. Well, why? Well, I think it's because. And he may be right. A person might be right in his suspicion and attaching the worst to it. Could be right. But the point is, the thought process is you're not supposed to do that until there's enough evidence to show that that's the way things are. Brother Gene? Yes.
You can't testify in court about what you thought somebody else thought.
Exactly. There's no...
Inadmissible.
It's inadmissible.
Unsupportable.
It's called due process.
Due process, that's right. Exactly right.
And the situation in Corinth, you got to remember, it might have been a little different. The brethren had the right attitude about it to start with.
Yes.
Because they were puffed up and
Yes.
willing to live with it.
Exactly.
To Paul.
To Paul had to deal with it. Yeah,
And
yeah.
they-
They're proud of
and
their...
They overreacted.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, Lee.
I was just thinking about later on, Jesus talks about if someone sins against you, but the idea there still is that if there's any question in your mind as to why someone did something, the right thing to do, Jesus is going to be addressing is just go talk to
Yeah,
them.
later
In
on.
other words, there's an answer to
Yeah.
keeping this from getting out of hand.
Exactly, yeah. Patty mentioned the other day, when we were talking about prayer, the lines of communication have to be wide open. And then even as we communicate, there ought to be that benevolent spirit that we're giving somebody the benefit of the doubt, even if he doesn't deserve it. We're still doing that. Sometimes people can treat us unkindly and criticize us about something, and guess what? They can be right about it. And they're wrong maybe in the way they do it, but they may be right about you or me. Yes, sir.
If you talk about the care of not judging.
Yeah.
I think about the Pharisee when he was praying, I'm glad I'm not like that.
Yeah.
We gotta be careful in things that we say that can constitute us to make a judgment on
Yes,
people.
I think that's right. I know it's right.
But Galatians 6 says, restore
Yes.
one that's taken in a fall, but remember yourself.
Yourself, lest you also be tempted. That's a good point. Great point.
Who is without guilt cast the first stone.
Yes, yes. And it doesn't mean that we can never reprove anybody. Well, you got sin in your life too. Well, that's right. But you're at least not trying to condemn somebody or reprove him and get him to change when you're doing the very same thing yourself. If it were a case where the only persons who could ever teach or reprove another were those who never made any mistakes, then how many teachers or reprovers would we have? None. And so I couldn't help but think about Peter when I was studying over this again. Peter denied the Lord, and in the denial, basically, it was a lie. He lied. Later on, even, he dissembled, acted as a hypocrite when the situation there in Antioch, the Judaizers came from Jerusalem, and he separated himself. You remember, from some of the Gentiles when he had been hobnobbing and socializing with them, and Paul had to rebuke him to his face. He mentions in Galatians 2. However, look with me real briefly. Keep your finger there. Turn over to 1 Peter 2. 1 Peter 2. This is the same Peter that wrote, that said all these things. And look at verse 1. Whoever has that first reading.
Therefore put aside all malice and all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and all slander.
Yeah, as newborn babes long for. Do you see Peter in any of those sins that he says put it all away? Yeah, and almost every one of them. Wickedness, guile or deceit, hypocrisies, envies. I mean, you could take each of those words and find an event in Peter's life where he was guilty of all these things. And yet he's writing, he's teaching on this. So it's not a case that if you never, but by the time he writes this, what's going on with Peter? You'd think he's not doing these things. Yeah. So, okay, I've got a note under number 2 that I quoted from Brother McGarvey in the Fourfold Gospel. Here again, Jesus lays down a general principle in the form of a universal prohibition. The principle is, of course, to be limited by other scriptural laws concerning judgment. It does not prohibit judgment by civil courts, apostolically approved judgment of the church on those who walk disorderly that we talked about. Number 3, private judgment as to wrongdoers. This is also ordered by Christ and the apostles. The commandment is leveled at rash, censorious, uncharitable judgments and the fault-finding spirit or disposition which condemns upon surmise without examination of the charges, forgetful that we also shall stand in the judgment and shall need mercy. Our judgment of Christians must be charitable in remembrance of the fact that they are God's servants, Romans 14, and that he reserves to himself the ultimate right of judging both them and us. I thought that was pretty good. Comment or question on any of this?
Sometimes a brother or sister may use this because they don't know you have what you're trying to share with them what you're good at.
Yes.
And so they telling you, like you said, none of us are perfect, but saying you have no business coming to me saying that because of X, Y, Z in your life. And usually that's often somebody really close to you, you know, because we're not perfect. And they know these things, so then you're hesitant. You think you're trying to help, not that you think you're perfect. And I'm going to this person with my perfection to share or to show them this, but then they use that as, don't judge me.
Yeah, they use it against you.
Your own self. And I don't really need to hear you.
Yeah.
But, and of course, you have to, as an individual, judge your own motives and why you are saying, why you are addressing that person out of love, out of
Yeah.
concern, over their soul, over an eternal destiny.
Yeah.
But that's really hurtful if you are truly think that, and maybe you should go back and examine yourself and say, was that the case? But if you're truly trying to help somebody and that's, you're looking out for their soul and that's how they approach with that, and it's very hurtful when you weren't not trying, that's not what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and in essence, people are impugning your motives, your own motives. And somebody can say something about you to you, and that's not really that's not you. And then you say, well, that's, and then it's kind of right, well, you're judging. It's a difficult, boy, this just hits us square between the eyes, doesn't it, oftentimes, and we just want to do the best. The passage Brother Gene mentioned in Galatians 6 does tell us that if there's a problem in a person's life of sin, then those who are spiritual, doesn't mean we never made a mistake, all of us have. But thee who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness or meekness, considering yourself, lest thou also be tempted. So it obviously is a situation where, I've got a responsibility to deal with the issue. If you can deal with more of the issue and not the person, this is the way we need to be. This is and not make it more of an attack on the person himself. But the problem is, whenever you attack the behavior, there's a person behind the behavior. It's difficult for people to make that separation. But anyway, you have something else you want to say, brother?
The person who receives a rebuke or a correction needs to have, not necessarily have a repentant spirit.
Yes. Yeah.
And, we can see the attitude of the prodigal son when he came
Yes.
back to the father.
Yes.
We can see the attitude of the older brother.
Yeah.
I don't want him back.
He's better off gone.
Be hard for the older brother to present the face of forgiveness that the father did because it wasn't in his heart.
Exactly right. There's we see it all through the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, the meek. The idea of meekness, James 1:25, receive with meekness the implanted word which is able to save your soul. That's so significant. The idea is to have a docile, moldable type spirit. That when someone comes to me, am I really guilty? And quite frankly, sometimes a person can be harsh toward us. And as I mentioned a while ago, there can be an element of truth. Well, just because they have been harsh in their judgment of me, does that mean I dismiss the truth that was couched within the harshness? No, you still listen. What was that Lincoln said? I think it was Secretary Seward said that Lincoln is a gorilla. He's the original ape in the White House. And Lincoln supposedly said, Secretary Seward is a wise man. I should look into it. Don't just race your motors and go off.
Yeah.
That reminds me.
I guess it was in Gettysburg with malice
Toward none. Charity, yes, thank you. With malice toward none, with charity for all. Things would have been different in the South, I think, had Lincoln not been shot. Yes, sir.
That reminded me of a question that was on every evaluation I had when I was working.
Mm-hmm.
Accepts criticism well.
Yeah.
It was on a scale of 1 to 5 with comments.
Yeah.
And you could get really upset about what was answered there.
Yeah.
By your boss.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. Does anybody like to be told they're wrong? I don't. Somebody said one time to me, I was preaching, He said, well, you think you're right about everything. I said, I don't want to be wrong about anything, but I also know that I could be wrong. So if you'll tell me some area, I'll be happy to change. That didn't go over too well. There were other problems with him though.
Time is a critical part of it. The longer you let it go, the harder it is to correct.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Good point. Okay, all right. Well, we hadn't finished. We got about 3 or 4 minutes here. The other part that that Cooper read, let's see, we got down to 1 and 2. Okay, now he illustrates it in 3 and 4 and 5. And that is, why do you behold, or you're looking for the mote that is in your brother's eye, but you don't consider the what? The beam that is in your own. So you've got a mote or a speck and a beam, like a log, a timber, like a railroad cross tie, something like that. How wilt thou say to your brother, let me cast out the mote out of your own eye, and lo, the beam is in your, out of your eye, and lo, the beam is in your own eye? You hypocrite, cast out first the beam out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to cast out the mote out of your brother's eye. That actually is a modification or just an illustration of what command. Verse 1, what? Don't judge harshly. Yeah, don't judge that you mean that kind of fault-finding, censorious judgment when you got the same problem yourself. So, and then it really ties in again with what Brother Gene mentioned in Galatians 6. You need to consider who when you're offering a criticism? Yourself, lest you also be tempted. You know, it doesn't hurt to say to somebody who's having problems that, you know, I've got some similar problems, or I've got this. There's that empathy that you can show. Look, you know, I've got my set of problems too, but here's a situation that, you know, neither one of us need to get in. There's a way of going about things, and we don't always do the right, do the best. I know I don't. You try your best. I remember having a lesson one time back on Acts 8, and Peter and Simon. You remember when Simon sought to buy the gift of God with money, and Peter said, Simon, you have no part or lot in this. You're Simon the sorcerer. Your heart is not right. I perceive you're in the gall of bitterness and the bond of iniquity. Simon could have said, you know, he didn't tell me first. He didn't talk to me privately. Who does he think he is? Peter's got his own set of problems. There are a lot of things, but what Peter told Simon, the sorcerer, was right. Regardless of the tone of voice, regardless of a lot of other things. So we need, you know, it's hard to do, but if we can, whenever there's somebody says something harshly to us, examine self, don't respond in kind, and that can go a long way. All right, define a mote. That's in the King James, the mote that is in your own eye. What is a mote? Some of your translations actually explain it. It's a speck. It's something small. That's right. Carphus, it is a little dry stalk or a twig. A beam, what is that? Something large, a log. I've got it defined as a plank here. A timber in walls. And again, I quoted from McGarvey. It's a very common thing that men who pronounce forbidden judgments on their brethren possess themselves in a greater degree of that fault which they condemn. They are satirized here by the figure of a man with a beam or heavy house rafter in his own eye. By the way, I omitted the word eye, should be right above own. His own eye, officiously proposing to extract a mote from the neighbor's eye. This is hypocrisy because it's assuming to be far better than we are. The command for first cast the beam out of your own eye must not be construed as requiring us to get rid of all faults before we attempt to correct others. For on this condition, none would be qualified for the position of teachers. But it requires that we shall not rid ourselves of a given fault. It requires that we shall rid ourselves of a given fault preparatory to rebuking that fault in another. The lesson is especially important to public teachers, for they have power for good only as they can conduct themselves, coincides with their teaching. I can't see this morning. All right, so I think we've talked about that. What does the Lord call one who makes himself a judge of another while guilty of the same or similar sins? A what? A hypocrite, that's right. Hypocrite is from a word that means to play act, to be a stage player. You're putting forth a type of a person that you're really not, you know. Okay, comment, question? Yes, sir, Josh?
I know that, you know, the scripture wasn't really intended for this, but, you know, Christ seems to use an exaggeration, and sometimes we exaggerate too. Is that necessarily a simple?
Not necessarily. I think there's a word hyperbole, you know, that, Lee and I were listening to talk radio, that somebody said a hyperbole. I said, where in the world he come from? A hyperbole. Is that like the Super Bowl? But a hyperbole is a gross exaggeration to emphasize the point, Josh, and you're right. Jesus does it right here. And it's almost humorous when you have like a log or something coming out your own eye, and at the same time you're leaning over with a magnifying glass trying to get a little piece of sawdust out of your neighbor's eye. It's humorous, and you're exactly right. Sometimes the Bible does speak, the word all is used sometimes. Cretans are all liars, evil beasts, idle gluttons, but there was a churches on Crete, you know. So in a sense, yes, I think that's right. Good point. Okay, we'll have to stop, guys. Enjoyed it very much.